Pennsylvania 65000.
You can still call that number and get through.
New York was absolutely just one of the most beautiful places you could ever be because there was so much to hear, so much to see.
It started with radio. You start listening to the radio and you hear them. Then when you see that they're going to be appearing, then's when you go. Your first feeling for the big band music is you hear it, and then you want to see it.
When I first came in 1939, it was like going to heaven. I had my choice of going to the Paramount Theater and hearing Lunsford, or I could go to 52nd Street and hear Basie's band. Louis Armstrong was in the Cotton Club, and Duke Ellington was uptown at the Apollo Theater.
Welcome from me, Sheila Tracy, to New York, the hub of the big band era, an era that'll never be forgotten by those who experienced it, whether as musicians, fans or critics. And one of the most knowledgeable of those has to be George T. Simon, the editor of Metronome, who joined the magazine in 1935. What was it really like in those days?
Oh, it was great. There was just so much to do. I remember I used to visit 2 and 3, sometimes 4 different bands in one evening because they were located pretty centrally here in Manhattan. And I'd go to hear Harry James at the Lincoln Hotel, and then maybe I'd go up to the Edison and hear Les Brown, and then down to the Pennsylvania Hotel, which is now called something else. I forget what it's called. And there would be Glenn Miller, and then maybe go across a couple of blocks to 34th and 8th Avenue here, Jimmy Dorsey. Maybe not that many one night, but then later on, of course, there's always 52nd Street. I could hear Basie up there. I'm talking about bands that may not have been playing concurrently, but that's the sort of thing it was.
Bands were there to be danced to, and as well as the hotels, you could go to the newly opened Rainbow Room on the 65th floor of the Rockefeller Center, suspended amongst the stars, with its revolving floor and changing lights. Incidentally, that has recently been restored to its former glory, and it's a quite magical place. Then there were the ballrooms like the Roseland, the Savoy, and the Meadowbrook in New Jersey, which were packed night after night. It was at the Meadowbrook that Harry James broke all records by attracting over 30,000 customers in 1 week.
One thing about the Harry James Band that a lot of people don't realize, but one reason it swung so much is that Harry James set the best tempos I've ever known of any band leader. And tempos are so important. A lot of people don't realize this, but you can play a tune at one tempo and then increase it by just a very slight bit, and it won't swing the way it does the right tempo. And Harry, having been a drummer, used to stand up in front of the band and you just beat his feet. I remember Teddy Hill, black man up in Savoy Ballroom, maybe Harry got it from him, used to just stand in front of the band and tap his feet until he got just the right tempo for the tune they're going to play, and then he'd go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, and they get off. And a lot of band leaders set wrong tempos. Glenn Miller and I fought constantly about his tempos. I was always complaining about his tempos and about his rhythm section.
You played with Glenn Miller, of course, didn't you? Played drums.
I was the original drummer in the band, but I heard the first records and I decided I'd be better off as a writer.
Clem Miller Orchestra with Glen Island Special, written by trombonist arranger Eddie Durham for the band's debut at the Glen Island Casino in the summer of 1939.
Glen Island Casino is an island in Long Island Sound, just off New Rochelle. Now it's practically part of New York City, so you don't think of it as anything special. But in those days, it was way out in the country, and the building itself was an old barn. It was a ugly-looking structure, but there was something exciting and romantic and adventurous to go there. It was very cheap. I think you used to pay a minimum or a cover charge of $1 or $1.25, and you could nurse a Coca-Cola for the entire evening and listen to the bands.
New York businessman Howard Schwartz. Playing Glen Island Casino was considered to be the tops because of the regular broadcast, which pretty well guaranteed a band's future success. Immediately prior to the Glen Island opening, Miller had whipped his band into shape during a lengthy stay at Frank Daly's Meadowbrook. The previous 2 years had been an uphill struggle for him, but now he decided to pull out all the stops, making his lineup the first major band to use 8 brass. He'd also hired a young arranger called Bill Finnegan, who now lives in Connecticut, too far for me to drive from New York, so I got him to reminisce on the telephone about his days with the band.
They worked in the Glen Island Casino up in New Rochelle, New York, on the Long Island Sound there. They worked a summer there, so I moved up there and lived in Pelham, the next town, and we used to do a rehearsal in the afternoon, one day a week, with an afternoon broadcast out of the place. And the waiters were very noisy with the silverware and everything, and we're doing a broadcast. So Glenn had to tip the waiters to keep them quiet for a half hour during a broadcast. Otherwise, it was like bedlam in the background, you know, with all their noises. Well, that was a pretty happy summer. The guys in the band and I lived in this apartment building on the golf course there, and we had a good time hanging out together. The band was in good shape, and that was really the summer that the band came alive, you know, and we had lots of broadcasts from Glen Island Casino, so people heard it all over the country. And when the band finally left there and went out on one-nighters, that's when they started packing them in, and when there was a lot of excitement about the band from then on.
Johnny comes marching home again, hooray, hooray. We'll give him a hearty welcome then, hooray, hooray.
All the men will cheer and the boys will shout, the gals dress up and they'll all turn out,
and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home.
Get ready for the Jubilee.
Hooray, hooray.
He'll get 3 cheers from you and me.
Hooray, hooray.
Uncle Sam will prove he's still the champ. He'll close up shop and break up camp,
and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. When Johnny comes marching home. When Johnny comes marching home. When Johnny comes marching home.
Glenn Miller and the Modernaires with Bill Finnegan's arrangement of When Johnny Comes Marching Home. Miller was never very popular with his musicians, even less so when they were all members of the American Armed Forces.
He was a stickler for detail and get your hair cut and shine your shoes and stop talking and do this and do that. He seemed to take the fact that he was an officer too seriously. I mean, we knew each other from civilian days. And, hi, Glenn, let's have a beer. Yeah, let's have a beer. But now he was an officer. And, of course, there was that famous morning where he got all of us out of bed and accused us of being similar to gangsters and gave us an hour in which to shave off our mustaches, which was a horrible thing.
You mean everybody had to shave their moustache?
Everyone, yes. And of course, as a trumpet player, it affected my playing.
Bernie Privin, who played trumpet in Glenn Miller's Army Air Force Band and came to England in 1944. Back in November 1938, Bernie had joined Artie Shaw, who was appearing in the Blue Room of the Hotel Lincoln. It was the band's first big-time New York engagement, and its leader had already showed signs of cracking up under the strain by collapsing on stage. Within 2 years, Artie Shaw had packed in the band, taken himself off to Acapulco, returned and formed another band, which included trombonist Jack Jenny. Remember that beautiful solo of his on Stardust?
Artie Shaw was very nice. He depended on the band to know exactly what he had in mind, and it was the type of band that once you played something, or having established the style of the band, whenever a new arrangement would come in, the musicians would know exactly what he expected of it.
When I talked to Artie Shaw and told him what Bernie Privn had said, it brought an explosive reaction. Nice? What sort of a dumb word do you call that? He said. But he mellowed somewhat when I told him Bernie had also said he learnt a great deal from being in his band.
I try to get the best out of people by encouraging them to do the best they can. And that's about the way it works. And I had some very fine musicians in my band, and I was privileged to have them there, that I was in a position to hire them. Jack Jenney was probably the most underrated trombone player that ever lived, just as Davy Tuff was probably the most underrated drummer that ever was. You know, we live in a world in which now jazz is perceived as a black music. If it were, it would be very meager. Music is neither black nor white nor purple. Music is music. The blacks did originate this idiom that we now call jazz, which is a stupid word to begin with, and the whites brought a certain amount of discipline to it and added certain things just as the blacks did.
Of all the records you've made, is there any that you are still pretty proud of today?
There are about 11 bars that I played that are about perfect. They're about as close to perfection as you can get. No one can do it better. A cadenza at the end of a piece called These Foolish Things that isn't even in print anymore.
Artie Shaw, undoubtedly one of the great clarinet players of all time, and to think he last played in 1954. One of the most popular band venues in New York was the Café Rouge at the Hotel Pennsylvania. It was here that a great friend of Artie Shaw's, pianist Claude Thornhill, tried out his newly formed lineup, depping for the Glenn Miller Orchestra on a couple of occasions. But it was in March 1941 that the band got its first big break when it was booked for 2 months at Glen Island Casino. Much later, bassist Bill Crow joined the band.
Well, Claude was a lovely eccentric. He was a fine musician, a really good arranger. If you listen to his theme song, Snowfall, that's both his composition and arrangement, and you can see the texture of that orchestra that he established. I'd been on the band about a week or two, and I discovered that Claude hated the spotlight. He didn't like to make announcements, and he hated it when anybody put a light on the piano. He would get them to turn it off. We got to one ballroom down in the south somewhere, maybe Texas. It was a very high-tech ballroom, and I realized that instead of a light man up in the booth, they had wired the bandstand up so that each section or area of the bandstand, there was a cable with a little foot switch, and you could just step on it, on and off, you know. So I found all the ones while I was setting up the bass. I found all of the switches that went to lights that seemed to be pointed at the piano, and I pulled them all around behind my own music stand. And every time Claude would play two notes out in the open, I would hit him with this barrage of spotlights. And he squirmed. He was just so uncomfortable. And at the first intermission, I saw him hunting around on the bandstand until he found the switches and moved them where I couldn't get to them.
Another Claude Thornhill's sideman was trombonist Billy Verplanck.
Those arrangements were just wonderful. I just left Jimmy Dorsey's band, and I joined Claude's band at the Frank Daly's Meadowbrook that's on Pompton Turnpike in Cedar Grove, New Jersey. And it was a place that I'd listened to when I was a little boy. I mean, they used to have bands used to come on every night, and I remember we played George Wellington's Godchild, but the Jerry Mulligan arrangement of that, and of course the great Gil Evans, Robin's Nest. I mean, all these wonderful arrangements that Claude had, La Paloma, and anyway, like when the break came, I said to Claude, "Geez, do we really get paid to play music like this?"
The Claude Thornhill Orchestra with Robin's Nest. The Paramount Theatre was the place in New York to see the big bands, and former Benny Goodman drummer Sonny Igo often went there as a young boy to see his heroes.
The doors would open at 8 o'clock, and the first show would start at 8:30. They'd put the movie on at 8:30 in the morning, and it cost about 35 cents to get in, and you could go in the Paramount before 10:30 in the morning when it changed to 50 cents, I think. You could go in and stay all day if you want. You could bring your lunch and stay there all day. I'd stay for 2 or 3 shows, the minimum. And I saw all the bands. It was like getting all these great drummers. It was like getting a free lesson all the time. So what they would do is play a movie and maybe a short subject, and they even had a community sing, which, corny as it may sound, was a lot of fun to do, because they had the lyrics up on the screen with the bouncing ball and a big huge house organist and this organist playing all these pop tunes, and we'd all sing, and then the band, they'd have previews of who's going to be next, and then you could see the band guys walking into the pit, and you could see the instruments gleaming in the light and all that kind of stuff, and here they come, here they come, here they come. And then all of a sudden, they're presenting Benny Goodman or whoever it was, and the whole thing would start to come up. It's, the Paramount stage raised like on an elevator, it reached to 1 story above the audience practically. It was amazing. And they'd play the theme song, the Benny's theme song, and you almost fall out of the balcony trying to get there.
In 1939, Jimmy Maxwell, who came from the West Coast and wanted to go east because, according to him, that's where all the good musicians were, joined the Benny Goodman trumpet section.
When I joined the band, one of the trumpet players told me, kid, in this band we don't get the music out, so you got 1 week to memorize the book. That's about 210 pieces. And in Benny's band, after the job, 1 o'clock in the morning, he'd tell you there's a rehearsal in an hour. Come back at 2 o'clock. They generally had run 3 hours for one piece. And he would generally do it without the drum, because he'd say if you can't play in time without the drum, you can't play in time at all. So we have to do it without the drum. And he was very strict. You couldn't chew gum, you couldn't smoke. I know the first rehearsal I went to, I came as I dressed in Hollywood in a pair of corduroys, a sweatshirt, and loafers with no socks, probably. And he says, where are you going, fishing? I said, no, I'm coming to rehearsal. And he says, well, go home and put a suit and tie on. This is New York. But it was, an unbelievable experience. It was the most famous band in the country, I suppose, in the world. And wherever we would go, whatever airport or train station, there would generally be thousands of people, maybe 1,000 or two, but always hundreds, a few hundred people. And when we would played in the Paramount Theater in New York, people would line up the night before to sleep on the sidewalk to get in the show in the next day. And I never had an experience like that. The best way I can explain to people nowadays was like being with the Beatles.
Sugarfoot Stomp, the Benny Goodman Band with Harry James in the trumpet section. James got on well with Goodman, but not everyone did. His band had a high turnover of musicians who, if they fell short of their leader's expectations, would either be ignored by him or subjected to a fish-like stare that became known as the Goodman Ray. Trumpeter Ewan Rasey, who's played on innumerable Hollywood soundtracks, remembers his first meeting with Goodman at the Fox Studios.
I didn't like Benny Goodman, really. He very unfair man, very unfair. The first time I got called to Fox, the trumpet player walked off, the first trumpet player, and he said, "Can you come around?" And I just got home, and my mom said that somebody called you, get out there as soon as you can. At Fox, I went out there, and he was having a guy named Bobby Geyer play the third trumpet part all by himself, but he wasn't helping him. He just all by himself. It has no meaning. It has no meaning. And he'd kind of shake his head. It was demeaning. That's not. And this is nothing new. He's gone through with a lot of other people, but he wasn't a kind man. A great player, and he made the whole band swing. But he wasn't kind and thoughtful of individuals in the band. Well, Irv Goodman tried to throw his horn. He threw his horn at him one time. His own brother. He gets so angry about that. So I'd only play just in town. I never want to go on the road.
Benny Goodman wanted everyone, especially his musicians, to think his band was the best, as Jimmy Maxwell discovered when he once told Goodman how much he admired Duke Ellington.
I said, you know, as long as you use arrangements from Basie and other bands and black arrangers, well, why don't you get some arrangements from Duke? I said, those are really good. I said, you like that band? I said, of course I like that band. It's the greatest. Don't you think so? And he said, no. I said, well, who do you think is? He said, well, I kind of think my band is. I said, oh, come on. He said, no, don't you? I said, no, I think Duke is. He said, well, who's your favorite clarinet player? And I said, Barney Bigard. About a half hour later, the manager came down and said, the old man wants to talk to you. And I went back, and he said, you know, Pops, I don't think I want anybody in my band that doesn't think we're the best, so I'm going to have to put you on notice. I was on notice for 6 months while I auditioned trumpet players. Finally, at Catalina, after work every night, we got off early, and I used to stop at a waterfront cafe where a friend of mine was playing. And I'd sit in for the last hour and a half of his job. And Benny used to come down there every night. I should tell you, Benny wears glasses, and they're always greasy. You couldn't see 3 feet in front of him. Finally, the manager came to me one night and says, the old man's got a replacement for you. And I said, who is it? He says, the trumpet player in the Seagull. I said, there is no trumpet player there. I play there. He says, I know it, but he doesn't. He said, hire that kid in Maxwell's place. So I stayed with the band another 2.5 years.
Now, as well as the theatres and ballrooms, the name bands were hired to play at private functions. New York businessman Howard Schwartz remembers his college days.
Most colleges at the time used to have these big events, the junior prom and that kind of thing, where they would bring in the big bands. They were major events. You'd get dressed up in formal clothes, and, choosing the girl to go with was very, very important. And I remember very, very vividly that it must have been about 1942 or 43 that Benny Goodman came and introduced a new girl singer who was Peggy Lee.
But I'll never be the same until I discover what became of my old flame.
One of the first recordings Peggy Lee made with Benny Goodman. Goodman had hired her in August 1941 after Helen Forrest decided to leave, and she made her New York debut with the band at the Terrace Room at the Hotel New Yorker. Now, when the Count Basie Orchestra made its first appearance at the Roseland Ballroom in New York, George Simon was there for metronome.
Interestingly enough, on one bandstand was Basie, and the other bandstand was another new band, Woody Herman's band. And I liked Woody Herman's band better than I did Basie's band, which John Hammond, who was Basie's big mentor, never forgave me. Although in his later years, he did tell me, George, I think you were right. I did listen to some of those records. And what I wrote about in those days was, I remember, I can paraphrase what I wrote about, and I said, the saxes play out of tune, but if you think the saxes are out of tune, listen to the brass. And if you think the brass is out of tune, listen to the whole ensemble, and you get an idea. And you know that years later, Basie admitted I was absolutely right. So did Buck Clayton. Buck used to love to quote that thing because he said it was absolutely true about that band. And the reason that happened, of course, and it was sort of insensitive perhaps of me not to realize it, but the band was scuffling and the guys were playing on fairly inferior instruments, and some of the instruments just could not be played in tune. Although some of the guys had good enough instruments to play in tune also and didn't.
Count Basie's 1 O'Clock Jump, which was a head arrangement never actually written down, as many of those early band hits were. Unlike Goodman, Bill Basie was a very popular band leader. Harry Sweets Edison should know. He was in the trumpet section of that band for 15 years.
It's just like a happy family. Well, we were together more than we were with our wives, so we had no choice but to get together, you know. We had a ball all the time. It was just never no arguments, never no malice, no jealousy. Everybody was just happy. We were making $9 a night, and he was making 15. So it was a beautiful, beautiful rapport we had with each other. It was absolutely, I miss all the guys, you know, because we had such a ball and so much fun together, you know.
The great Joe Williams, whose recording of Every Day I Have the Blues with Count Basie in the mid-50s made him a star, also had fond memories of the years he spent with the band.
That band at that time, with that personnel, 99 times out of 100, they were inspirational. Not just good, but inspirational. They played the charts like nobody else. They made them breathe and live the things they were playing. And I had a chance to sit there and enjoy it every single night. listen to every subtle little change, every subtle little improv, and things that were maybe just 4 notes that somebody would drop in, in different places and what have you. It would make such a difference that it would touch you, you'd look away. It was quite an experience. Also watching the old man, Mr. Basie. If someone made a mistake, I'd look at Mr. Basie. He always happened to be looking the other way. He never heard it. He never was looking at where it happened. He was always interested in something else other than what had happened that was wrong. And I'd watched that for a long time before I finally got the essence of what that was about. When you do something real exceptional, then you go with that. So you have to go with things that are not. In fact, it's a thing about life. I mean, with our friends, our friends are going to displease us sometimes. But that's no reason to cut them off just because they displease you. Never fired anybody. They always fired themselves.
Is that true? He never actually fired anybody? Did he never?
I don't think so.
Really?
I don't think so, not really. A disc jockey asked him once, how would he like to be remembered? And he says, just a nice guy.
Every day I have the blues. Every day I have the blues. Well, you see me worry, baby, because it's you I hate to lose. Nobody loves me. Nobody seems to care. Nobody loves me. Nobody seems to care. Speaking of bad luck and trouble, well, you know I've had my share. I'm gonna pack my suitcase, moving on down the line. Oh, I'm gonna pack my suitcase and move on down the line. Well, there ain't nobody worrying and there ain't nobody crying. Seems to me every day I have the blues. Every day I have the blues. You see me worry, baby, because it's you I hate to lose.
Joe Williams with Count Basie. One of the most popular bands on the New York hotel circuit was Guy Lombardo, who, off and on, was resident for more than 30 years at the Roosevelt Grill, where Enrique Viva worked as a waiter.
At that time, there was the fellow, they call him Mr. Guy Lombardo. And that time, every Wednesday, they give a bottle of alcohol or champagne to the customer. They go, with the number, they give for the number, So, and they put it in there, and the people come in. The grill was always full. When he died, a lot of people here cried because they liked the man. He was a very nice man.
British band leader Ivy Benson remembers seeing the Lombardo Band at the Roosevelt Grill in the 1950s.
Sweetest Music This Side of Heaven, it was called. I had dinner with the 3 brothers, Guy Carman, and I forget the name of the 3rd brother. Then he took me up on the stage, gave me his baton, he says, go and conduct. And I've got a lovely picture of myself conducting Guy Lombardo's band in New York.
sailboat in the moonlight and you. Wouldn't that be heaven, a heaven just for two? A soft breeze on a June night and you. What a perfect setting for letting dreams come true. A chance to sail away to Sweetheart Bay beneath the stars that shine. A chance to drift, for you to lift your tender lips to mine. The things, dear, that I long for are few. Just give me a sailboat in the moonlight and you.
Carmen Lombardo singing with Guy Lombardo and the name of the other brother, Liebert. And you can hear the second instalment of this programme, Big Bands in the Big Apple, on January the 9th, with Harry James, Duke Ellington, Stan Kenton, Buddy Rich, and of course the Dorses, Jimmy and Tommy, who had Buddy Rich on drums when this was broadcast in 1942. So it's goodbye from me, Sheila Tracy, and over to Mr. T.D. himself.
Buddy Rich and Ziggy Elman and these resourceful savants present their findings on the subject with the able assistance of the band in a dramatic dissertation entitled Hawaiian War Chant.